welcome. We are going to make a basic sourdough loaf of bread. So to begin, you need a bowl, your sourdough starter, bread flour. Some people do use regular all-purpose flour as well, but I use bread flour in mine. And then some sort of salt. I use pink Himalayan salt. And then some people will use measuring cups for theirs, but I do prefer to use a kitchen scale. And since I've started making sourdough, I actually use a kitchen scale for all of my baking, even if it's not just sourdough bread. I found it's way less dishes to wash at the end. So let's get started. First thing we're gonna do is we're gonna use our sourdough starter. So we're gonna put our bowl on top of our scale. I'm gonna tare it. It's called tearing it to 0. So I push the button until it zeroes out in grams. And then we're gonna take our sourdough starter, and I'm gonna use 100 grams of sourdough starter. So I will pour that in. Perfect. Okay, and then I am going to get 350 grams of filtered water, and I do have mine a little bit warmer because it just helps my bulk fermentation process, which we'll get to later. Okay, so I'm going to tare my scale again, and then I'm going to add my 350 grams of warm filtered water. And then you can just use a regular spoon if you want here. I have this Danish whisk that I use. So we're gonna mix the starter and the water together. This is called blooming the starter. You just mix it up until you see no pieces of starter left. And it kind of makes lots of bubbles on the top, so you can make sure that it's mixed really well. Okay, so then I'm gonna take the bowl and put it back onto my scale. I'm gonna tare it back to 0 again. And this time I'm gonna add 500 grams of my bread flour. Perfect. Okay, now I'm gonna you can do anywhere from 9 to 12 grams of salt per loaf. I like to do 12. So I'm going to tare it again and do 12 grams of salt. There we go. And then I'm going to take it off the scale and use my Danish whisk again. And I'm just kind of mixing the salt on the top with the flour, just so it kind of mixes up before I add the bottom layer of the water and starter. So now I'm gonna mix it all up. This takes a little bit. You wanna make sure that it is a shaggy dough consistency, but that everything is incorporated well. So this takes a few minutes usually. Alright, so set that aside. And I have a bowl scraper, so I'm just going to get the sides cleaned off pretty well. Make sure everything is really well mixed into the dough ball. That looks pretty good. See, this is what shaggy dough looks like. So now we will put a cover over it. I usually use a shower cap, one of the little disposable shower caps. Just pop that over it, and I let it set for about an hour before I start my stretch and folds. So we'll be back soon. Okay, we're back for our first stretch and fold. So a stretch and fold helps to build up the gluten structure of the dough. So basically, we do exactly what it says. We stretch the dough up, not a lot to where it's going to tear, but we stretch it up a little bit and then we fold it over. The first round, I usually do 6 around. I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I'm going to wet my hands a little bit just so my fingers don't stick to the dough too bad. I'm just kind of loosen it around the bowl, and then I'm going to grab it in my hands, stretch it up, fold it over. Turn the bowl a quarter of the way and do the same thing. Stretch and fold over. Stretch, fold over. Stretch and over. Do a couple more. Starting to get harder to stretch. That's good. See how springy it is? That gluten is building up. And then one more, and we'll call it good for this first round. Okay, perfect. So now that's set for an hour, and then I did my first set, and then I'm gonna put the shower cap back on and wait about a half hour, and then I'll do another set. I'm gonna do that a total of, I usually do 3 or 4 times. We're gonna do 4 today, so 4 times total. So I will come back in 30 minutes and do a second set. Okay, all ready for stretch and fold number 2. So here we go. I will explain this more a little later, but I do temp my dough, which is literally just taking the temperature of the dough to see how long I have to let it bulk ferment. But I'll go further into detail about that a little bit later. So I'm going to wet my hands again so it doesn't stick too bad. Okay. And we're going to do the same thing. I usually only do, it's probably only going to let me do about 4 this time. So we're going to loosen the dough again. Woo! Stretch up. Fold over. Stretch up. Over. Over. It's looking really good too. I don't know if you remembered what it looked like when it was a shaggy dough, but this is so much smoother. Look how smooth that is. It's looking great. Okay, so that is good for the second stretch and fold. So I'm gonna put my shower cap back on and wait another half hour for the third. We'll see you then. Okay, number 3. Just gonna check this real quick. Okay. Wet my hands again. And I'm going to show you, usually I only do about 3 stretch and folds, but if I end up doing 4, I will do coil folds at the end of my stretch and folds. I feel like, I don't know, it helps with the structure more, and it makes it look a little bit smoother. So I started adding those in, and I feel like it's made a difference in the outcome of my bread too. Okay, so that is the last stretch and fold. Now I'm going to show you coil folds. So on my hands a little bit more. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to scoop under the dough ball and I'm just going to give it like a little shake to loosen it like around the sides. It like folds over the sides of my hands, and then turn it a little bit and do it again. I usually do this for a minute or so. Really just helps to smooth it out more. Looking really good. How smooth that is. My hands are super, got them a little overly wet. Okay. All right, I think one more and we should be good for this round. And then we'll have one more round and I will explain during that round why I temp the dough and what that does for it. I lied, one more. Okay. Looks beautiful. Okay. See you in 30. Okay, last round. So I will explain now why I take the temperature of my dough. So the bulk fermentation process is very tricky, or you'll hear it's either bulk fermentation or bulk proofing, same thing. So it helps you to know what the temperature of your dough is so that you know how long you need it to bulk ferment or bulk proof. This is the best way I have found to make sure that my bread is the best that it can be. I've tried other methods and it was okay, but this one is pretty consistently right on to like the perfect loaf for us. Even if you were a little under fermented or a little over fermented, could still turn into super yummy bread. But if you want like that classic sourdough, awesome rise, big beautiful round loaves, this is the most tried and true way that I found to get that consistently. So I will post the chart that I use for figuring out how long I need to let it bulk ferment, but I will post it somewhere on there. But this loaf has been setting right around 77, 78 degrees. So it's gonna put me at around a 6.5 hour bulk rise. So I started at 3. That was when, so the time starts when you have mixed your dough. As soon as you're done mixing your dough, that is when the timing starts. That was, remember when we made the shaggy dough before we did any of our stretch and folds or anything. So mine, I finished mixing at 3 o'clock. So 6.5 hours puts me at 9:30. So around 9:30, I will check to see if it's ready. And then at that time, I'll show you the next step after that. So we're gonna do our last set of stretch and folds and coil folds. Ooh, that feels nice and soft. It's like a cloud. It might be. I'll do one more. And then I'll do a few coil folds to end it. Looking pretty good. Couple more and then we'll be done until we do our bench rest and pre-shape. All right, she looks pretty beautiful. So, whoop, oh boy. Okay. So that is what it looks like. We're gonna let it set the rest of the time. So until about 9:30. Okay. Alrighty, it is time. It is about 9:30, and I will show you the signs that this is ready. It might be hard to see. There are bubbles all throughout the sides. There are also bubbles on the top. It's really hard to see from that angle. There are bubbles on the top and the sides. The inside is super jiggly, and that is how we know it's ready. So what I do is I will get the counter wet. I don't like to use flour. I don't like to use a lot of flour in this step. A lot of people do use flour, and I'm sure that works just fine, but it just gets too messy for me. I don't like that. So just use water. And then I dump the dough. I let it come out on its own for the most part. I do not force it. I don't know if that really makes a difference, but the person that I initially watched to get started in sourdough, this is how she does it. So I just follow what she does. So I've always just kind of let it come out on its own. Beautiful. Okay, so again, I'm gonna make sure my hands are a little bit wet to do this. So this is called the pre-shaping. This just helps when you're doing the final shaping. It helps it keep its shape. It just helps it keep its shape better. So what I do in the beginning is I just kind of form it around a little bit so it's kind of circular. And then I'm just gonna do a light shaping. So I'm just gonna kind of push a little and pull a little. Okay, and that's it. And then I'm just gonna set it to the side, cover it with a tea towel for about 20 minutes to a half hour, and then I'll come back and do the final shaping. All right, time for our final shaping. Okay, so we're just gonna pick it up, flip it over. I'm gonna stretch it out the teeniest bit. If we were adding inclusions, I'd have to laminate it out quite a bit more, but since we're not and it's just a regular loaf, this is plenty big enough. So I'm gonna take one side, fold it halfway over, and then take the other side and fold it over. Then I'm gonna roll it up like a burrito. Roll, roll, roll. Okay. And then after you get it to look like a huge cinnamon roll, then I'm gonna take it and fold it in half. And then we're gonna do our push and pull. Ooh, a little bit. Okay. Push and pull. Okay. And that is looking pretty good. Okay. There's a big bubble there I'm gonna pop so that it doesn't get weird in the oven. All right. So we are good. So now I'm gonna stick it into, this is called a banneton. They make these in silicone too, that's washable, and I plan on getting those because these are kind of a pain in the butt, the ones with the, because you have to wash these. So I will grab this and place it in the bowl. So I'm gonna pick it up and I'm gonna put it seam side up. So pretty side down, seam side up. And then I kind of stitch this a little bit on the bottom just to make sure it's nice and tight. It's pretty good. Okay, and then once that is done, we're just gonna cover it up and it's gonna go in the fridge. How long you cold ferment it, it varies. It just depends how sour you like it, basically. But it can, if you let it go too long, it can overproof your bread. The longest I will do in the refrigerator is 3 or 4 days is pushing it. I did one 5-day and it was super sour and yummy, but it definitely was overproofed. It was flat like a Frisbee. So I would say 3 days is probably safe to be the max. I'm actually just gonna do this one for 1 day in the fridge and then we'll bake it tomorrow. So yeah, so I'm gonna stick it in the fridge just like this until we're ready to bake tomorrow. And we are officially ready to bake this loaf of sourdough bread. So I just took it out of the refrigerator. It was in there about 21 hours. So you could, like I said before, you can do it. You can even bake right after you're done shaping everything. I've done that too. Just put it right in the oven and it rises just fine. This just gives it a little bit more of that sour, like the tang in sourdough. And yeah, so all we do is I took my cover off and I'm just gonna, I have parchment paper here. I have, this is called, I call it a lame. Some people call it a lam or a lame. I've heard all of those, but I call it a bread lame. And then I have a preheated Dutch oven. I put it in My oven is set to 450, and this was in there with it from the very start of me preheating, and then I set a timer for a half hour, so it was in there for a full half hour even though the oven was preheated before that. And then I have a cup of ice, which I put into the Dutch oven after my bread is in there. And that just helps with, I get the pretty little like blisters on the outside of the bread, and it helps with the oven spring as well. So I will show you what I do. So we take it and we just dump it onto the parchment paper. Okay, that looks pretty good. And then I take the bread lame. And some people do like all these fancy scoring things on their bread. I just don't get that fancy. I just want to eat the bread. Don't really want to look at it as much as eating it. So I just do a simple cut. You're gonna cut it kind of at an angle. The first time through takes a little bit. I just do like a crescent shape, and then I cut it again just a little thicker. This helps me to get more of an oven spring, and it gives me like a little ear, that's what it's called, on the bread. So it just like flips up a little, and the top has like a thin like ear. It looks like the side of an ear. So just like that. And then I'm going to stick it into my preheated Dutch oven. Okay. Just like this. And then on the outsides of the parchment paper, I'm going to just put some of my ice in there, and you can hear it sizzle. It gives it a little steam in there so that it achieves that the blisters that I really like in there, and then also helps with the oven spring. So I also put, this guy's been through some stuff. This guy goes in on the rack underneath my Dutch oven while the bread is baking. It just helps so that the bottom of the bread doesn't cook as fast as like the internal and on top of the bread. So I haven't had any burnt loaves using this method. So I put this on the bottom rack right underneath my Dutch oven. So I will put these in the oven, and then I will set the timer for about 45 minutes. And then we'll check the temperature of the inside of the dough with my thermometer. I usually like to make sure that it gets to about 210. People will go to only 205, but I have found that 210 is like my comfort zone, I guess, just so that I can make sure that it's 100% done. So yes, I will get this in the oven. Okay, I just took it out of the oven. A little bit ago. The internal temp is right at like 210, maybe 211. And then I ended up taking the lid off for like 3 or 4 minutes in the oven, just because I wanted the outside to have a little darker color than what it was. So let me actually bring this over here. Okay, so this is our beauty. Isn't she pretty? Here we go. So you see the blisters on the outside, and that is what I was referring to, the ear. That little part that's kind of sticking up, and it's like a nice round shape. It smells really, really good. Yeah, so that is how you make sourdough bread. There's definitely a learning curve with it, but if I can do it, literally anyone can do it. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you learned some valuable information about how to make sourdough bread. Thank you.